Welcome to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. We come to you this week from Long Branch, New Jersey. This is the district office of Congressman Frank Pallone, who is now one of the most powerful members of the House of Representatives as chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. We'll talk with him about health care, prescription drugs, teen vaping, and yes, impeachment. Also in this week's show, we talk to a high school student athlete who got into Stanford the right way about how he feels about the college admissions scandal. And if you know someone that has Alzheimer's, we have important information for you. Also, you've seen the sign in North Jersey, the embroidery capital of the world. We'll explain how they got that moniker. And now, my interview with 6th District Congressman Frank Pallone. Thank you so much for doing this. And by the way, congratulations on your chairmanship of the Commerce Committee.
Oh, thank you.
Energy and Commerce, I should say. I'm told by everybody it's one of the most powerful positions in the House. The Commerce Committee doesn't get the attention that some of the Judicial Committee gets, oversight committees, because they're on TV all the time because of what they do. But it may be the most powerful committee. Could you talk about what the power of the Commerce Committee?
Well, it's because most of the jurisdiction in the House, in other words, when you introduce a bill, right, 60% of the bills go to our committee. So, you may hear oversight does hearings, or you hear about Mueller report and some of the others. But if it's an actual bill or legislation you want to move, it's very likely it comes before our committee.
But in this partisan atmosphere, in this era of impeachment, is it difficult to get things done? Because necessarily people have to be on opposite sides.
It is and it isn't. I mean, it's always been true that if something rises to the level where there's a lot of media focus on it and it becomes, divisive, that it makes it a little harder to get things done. But most of what we do doesn't get to that level, where the media is focusing on it that much. And so I would say for the most part, no, we still get things done, and there's not the kind of divisiveness that people think exists. But it's definitely worse than it was. But I would say 85% of what we do in the committee is still bipartisan.
Well, let's talk about some of the things you're doing in the committee and some of the things you're pushing, which going back to things being partisan, you might have a difficult time getting done. One of them is net neutrality.
Yes.
And when you talk about net neutrality, it seems like an obvious area where consumers are pitted against businesses.
Right.
So I don't understand all the time why it doesn't get more attention, why more people aren't angry about it, and I think it's because they don't understand what it is or what it does.
Well, it's a combination of that. I mean, first of all, the name net neutrality is, sort of misplaced. It's really a free and open internet where, the internet provider can't charge more for certain, or speed things up or decide they don't want to carry certain content. I mean, that's really what it is. So I call it a free and open internet. But net neutrality is the sort of bureaucratic word. I think that the reason you're not hearing a lot about it now is, see, the Federal Communications Commission, when Obama was president and had a majority Democrats, they passed a net neutrality rule that says you have to have a free and open internet, right? But then when Trump became president, the majority switched on the FCC, and then they repealed that. And so we're going back now, passing a bill that says that you have to have net neutrality, you have to have a free and open internet. But most of the internet providers have not done any of the bad things yet. And I think part of it is because they're fearful of it, right? In other words, they're fearful of deciding to charge more if something's speeded up, or not carrying certain content, or charging more, or whatever. So I think that that's one of the reasons why you're not getting a public outcry. But if they started to do some of these bad things, which they're allowed to now because net neutrality has been repealed, then I think you'll see a huge outcry.
Explain this to me, though. So when I get some solicitation to get faster internet, if I pay more money, doesn't that play into this?
Of course.
That's exactly what we're talking about. That's what I don't think people understand. Now, you have a bill on net neutrality, but it's probably going to go nowhere.
No, I disagree with you. I think this is there. I think what you kind of hinted at is true, which is that this is something that's bipartisan. In other words, people don't want to see, they want to have a free and open internet. And so the Republicans are kind of playing, I'm going to be partisan now, they're playing a little game. They say, oh, we want a free and open internet, but we don't want to repeal the net neutrality rule because they say they don't like the way it was done, right? So we passed this bill, and it was pretty partisan. I think, only had one Republican vote in the House. But there's a lot of support for net neutrality. So I do think that the Senate will take it up and maybe pass a bill that's not as strong or is done in a different way, and that we can resolve those differences and get something to the president.
Which is the way the process is supposed to work.
Right, that's what I'm hoping. And I think there's a real possibility of that, because no Republican is going to tell you they don't want a free and open internet. They'll say things like, well, we don't like to do it through Title II. And then, your eyes will glaze over and say, what the hell's that?
So it can go through the Senate and the president will sign it?
Well, I mean, who knows? But
okay.
I'm just trying to say this is not something, in part because of what you said, which is it's not like people are out there fighting over this.
Right.
I think this is something that maybe we can get resolved.
But it's extremely important, as is healthcare.
Oh, absolutely.
I know you've been dealing with healthcare. This is another issue where it's funny, everybody should be get together on, but so much of it's about the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
It's almost like if you were to pull that out, you could work together.
Well, I'll show you how absurd that is. Again, you're right, but I don't want to, here I am going to have to be a little more partisan. The label Affordable Care Act, or really Obamacare, right, because of Obama, is so, offensive, the fact that this is Obamacare to a lot of Republicans, that they don't even want to deal with it. So we had actually bipartisan agreement to do some change to Obamacare that would have been helpful to the public. I'm going back a few years now. And we did get it passed, but we had to rewrite the bill and not reference Obamacare because the Republicans didn't want to indicate that they were somehow supportive of Obamacare. So that's how absurd it was. But I deal with this kind of stuff every day, Larry, where, I have to kind of, I don't know what the word is, is sort of, relabel things or whatever so that they're acceptable, because if you use a certain label, then you can't get it passed. But if you relabel it, even though you're doing the same thing, you can get bipartisan support. I mean, it's just crazy.
I've talked to a lot of representatives, and they've had town halls, and they say they go to these town halls, and rarely does impeachment come up. Rarely does that come up. What people want to know is about healthcare and about prescription drug costs. Now, that can you get bipartisan support on being able to negotiate better prices?
Well, let me ask you this. We actually did a package of bills in the committee a couple weeks ago that deal with the pricing issue. The drug pricing issue is something that, the president says he wants lower prices, the Republicans say they want lower prices. So there's another area where I think we can actually do something. And we actually did. So we did a package of bills a couple weeks ago that bring back generic competition. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but you know what a generic drug is, right? Yeah. Well, a lot of that has sort of lost its value a little bit in the last few years because the brand name drug companies will pay the generic companies not to bring a generic to market to avoid competition, or when the patent expires on like a blockbuster drug, they won't give the formula over to the generic so they can develop a generic. So we did a package of bills that gets rid of that. It says that you can't pay the generic company to not develop a generic drug. You have to give them the formula so they can develop after the patent expires. And those were bipartisan. But now the next level, it passed the committee unanimously. It's going to go to the floor. I think it'll be pretty close to unanimous. And the Senate and the president support it. So that is something I guarantee is going to become law. And
that started in the Commerce Committee, and that will bring down prescription prices?
Oh, absolutely, because it reignites generics. There's some drugs where the generic is like $3 and the brand name is $150.
And when will we see the effect of that?
Well, as soon as it passes, but probably still talking a couple more months, I would say.
That's great. Still, a couple more months is good.
But in addition, you mentioned negotiated prices, so that's the next thing. In other words, we would like to, and this is something, again, the president says he supports, the Republicans support, and that is, giving the power to the government, in this case, the Health and Human Services Secretary, to negotiate prices for drugs under Medicare. Now, again, this is something that I think we will do and that we can get support, but the details are, like everything else, are always a problem, because the problem is, how do you get remember, you're not setting the price, right? Because you still want to have a competitive market and capitalism, whatever. So how do you get the drug company to come to the table and negotiate a price or participate. That's what we have to figure out.
They can't be forced to do that?
Well, you could, but there's a reluctance. You could force them to the table. The reluctance is to set the price. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't know that I would even necessarily have a problem setting a price, but that's perceived as socialist or communist or whatever you want to call it. And so you have to figure out a way to get, to negotiate and bring prices down. And that's what we're trying to figure out right now.
We have a few other topics to talk about. I especially want to talk about your bill on tobacco use among teenagers when we continue our conversation with Congressman Frank Pallone when Jersey Matters continues.